Good evening. Oh, that was good. Hello, good evening. I am the first of your authors and readers for today. I am Jonathan Stroud. I'm a writer, and it's a delight to be here at my local festival with you this evening. Well, autumn is coming on. It's getting dark. The nights are getting longer. Shadows are lengthening each day, and I thought it would be quite good to kick off with a ghost story, or a bit of a ghost story. It comes from this book, The Hollow Boy, which I just written, and it was published about 3 days ago. So this is the first time I've done a proper public reading of it, and I'm very excited about that. Now, The Hollow Boy is set in London, but it's an alternative London, a London with an epidemic of ghosts. There are lots of them around, and they're quite dangerous. And if you get ghost touched, your heart starts to slow, and you go all kind of clammy, and your head starts to spin, and you collapse, and before long, you will be dead. It's not good news. And the adults can't see the ghosts. So it's up to the young people, the children, to go and deal with them. And my heroes, Lockwood and Company, go into houses. In this case, it's a kind of boarding house, a B&B in London, and they deal with the ghosts they find there. So without further ado, I shall read you a little bit of it. The narrator, by the way, is called Lucy. Hold it. I suppose I should stop before things start getting messy and tell you exactly who I am. My name is Lucy Carlyle. I make my living destroying the risen spirits of the restless dead. I can throw a salt bomb 50 yards from a standing start and hold off 3 spectres with a broken rapier. I'm good with crowbars, magnesium flares, and candles. I walk alone into haunted rooms. I see ghosts when I choose to look for them and hear their voices too. I'm just under 5 foot 6 inches tall, have hair the color of a walnut coffin, and wear size 6 ectoplasm-proof boots. There, now we're properly introduced. So I stood with Lockwood and George on the first floor landing of the boarding house. All of a sudden, it was very cold. All of a sudden, I could hear things. I don't suppose there's any point trying to break down the door, George said. No point at all. Lockwood's voice had that far-off, absent quality it gets when he's using his sight. Sight, listening, and touch. They're the main kinds of psychic talent. Lockwood has the sharpest eyes of us, and I'm the best at listening and touch. George, he's an all-rounder. He's mediocre at all 3. I had my finger on the light switch on the wall beside me, but I didn't switch it on. Darkness stokes the psychic senses. Fear keeps your talent keen. We listened. We looked. I don't see anything yet, Lockwood said finally. Lucy, I'm getting voices, whispered voices. It sounded like a crowd of people all speaking over one another with the utmost urgency, yet so faint it was impossible to understand a thing. Lockwood turned the torch beam wide and circled it slowly round us. We were standing just before a pokey landing, neat enough, but cheaply furnished with purple curtains and an old cream carpet. Several numbered plywood doors gleamed dully in the shadows. It was supernaturally cold, and there was ghost fog stirring. Faint wreaths of pale green mist were rising from the carpet and winding slowly round our ankles. A feeling of unquantifiable dread deepened in us. Something wicked was very near. Lockwood adjusted his gloves. His face glowed in the torchlight. His dark eyes shone. As always, peril suited him. All right, he said softly. George, rig up an iron circle here. Lucy, see what the skull has to say. I'll check out the nearest rooms. With that, he lifted his rapier, pushed open a door, and disappeared inside, his long coat swirling behind him. We got to work. George took out a lantern, and by its light busied himself with the iron chains. I opened my rucksack and took out a large, faintly luminous glass jar. The top was secured by a complex plastic seal, and inside it, floating in green liquid, was a leering face. And I don't mean nicely leering. This was more the kind you get behind bars in a high-security prison. It was the face of a ghost, of a phantasm or spectre tied to the skull that rested in the jar. It was godless and disreputable and had no known name. I glared at it. Are you going to be sensible now? The toothless lips grinned awfully. I'm always sensible. What do you want to know? What are we dealing with up here? A cluster of spirits. They're restless and unhappy, and hold on, I'm getting something else. The face contorted suddenly. Oh, that's bad. That's real bad. If I were you, Lucy, I'd find a window and jump out. So what if you break both legs in several places? It's better than staying up here. I tapped the glass, making the face squint in surprise. Concentrate, I said. I want you to locate the source of this haunting, find where it's hidden. With that, I stood up. George had finished the circle, and a moment later, Lockwood emerged onto the landing and joined us both inside the chains. He was as calm and composed as ever. Well, that was horrible. What was? The decor in that bedroom. Lilac, green, and what I can only describe as a kind of bilious off-yellow. None of the colours went at all. So there's no ghost there? There is, as it happens. I fixed it in position with salt and iron, so it's safe enough for now. Go and look if you like. I'll replenish the supplies here. George and I took our torches, but didn't switch them on. We didn't need to. We were in a mean little bedroom. It had a single bed, a narrow wardrobe, and a tiny window, black and studded with rain. All this was illuminated by a horizontal orb of other light that hung above the bed, merging into the pillows and bed linen. In its center reclined the ghost of a man in striped pajamas. He lay on his back as if asleep, his limbs hovering slightly above the sheets. He had a small moustache and rumpled hair. His eyes were closed, his toothless mouth sagged against a stubble-dusted chin. Cold air streamed from the apparition. Twin circles of salt and iron filings, emptied by Lockwood from the canisters on his belt, encircled the bed. Whenever the pulsing aura drew too close, the particles of salt ignited, spitting out green fire. Whatever they charge for a room in this place, George said, it's way too much. Okay, I will stop there. That's the first of the ghosts they encounter, and they get more and more sinister as the book goes on. Right, that's the first one. I will bid you farewell, and we'll pass on to the next reading. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, we're really honoured tonight to have Annabel Baker, who is head girl at St Joseph's in the Park School.
The Ghost Teacher by Alan Alberg. The school is closed, the children gone, but the ghost of a teacher lingers on. As the daylight fades and the daytime ends, as the night draws in and the dark descends, she stands in the classroom as clear as glass, and calls the names of her absent class. The school is shut, the children groan, but the ghost of the teacher, all alone, puts the date on the board and moves about, as the night draws in and the stars come out, between desks aglow in the gloom, and calls for quiet in the silent room. The school is a ruin, the children fled, but the ghost of a teacher, long time dead, as the moon comes up and the first stars glide, puts on her coat and steps outside. In the moonlit playground, shadow-free, she stands on duty with a cup of tea. The school is forgotten, the children forget, but the ghost of a teacher lingers yet. As the night creeps up to the edge of day, she tidies the plasticine away, counts the scissors, a shimmer of glass, and says, "Off you go," to her absent class. She utters the words that no one hears, picks up her bag, and disappears.
Hello, good evening. I'm going to read a book called Wide Awake, Jake. And this is the actual copy I had when I was about 5 or 6. My name's Jake, and we had a couple of books with Jake in the title, and this is one of them. It's probably my favourite. Wide Awake, Jake. Once upon a time, there was a little boy called Jake who could not sleep. "I can't sleep," he told his papa. "Try," said his papa, and he tried. "I can't sleep," he told his big sister. "Read books," she said. "That's what I do, and I get sleepier and sleepier." So Jake took her big red book, her pink book, her small books, her picture books, and the book with a shiny cover. "I can't sleep," said Jake. "Why not?" said his sister, who was a bit cross at having no books left. "Too many books on my bed," said Jake. "Suck your thumb," said his little sister. "That's what I do, and I get sleepier and sleepier." So Jake did. "I can't sleep," said Jake. "Why not?" asked his little sister, who was a bit cross at being woken up. "My thumb is keeping me awake," said Jake. So he went to tell his mama. "I can't sleep," said Jake. "Then you must go and find the Yammy of Yorn," said his mama. "Who's he?" asked Jake. "Why, he's the sleep keeper," said his mama. "You go and find him, you tell him you can't sleep, and he'll tell you what to do." "But how do I find him?" asked Jake. "You go back upstairs, you lie down on your bed, and you yawn," said his mama. "And after a bit you'll find the way. But remember, you might meet with some dangers on the road, and I shall tell you what to do. When you meet a danger, you just yawn. Because when you yawn at someone, they have to yawn back, and all will be well." So Jake did. He went back to bed, and he yawned, and he yawned, and before long he found himself walking along a very exciting road. It had trees and bushes and a lot of little secret paths, and he liked it. But soon he came to a path which had been trampled down, and he heard a roar, and a very big lion rushed out of the bushes. "Roar," said the lion. Jake was a bit nervous, anyone would be, but he remembered what his mum had said, and he yawned at the lion. The lion roared again, but halfway through the roar it turned into a yawn, and then the lion yawned again, rubbed his eyes with his paws, and soon lay down and went to sleep. So Jake climbed over him and went on his way. Soon he came to some trees which had lost all their leaves. The ground all around was scorched and black. Jake listened, and he could hear some crackling as though something were burning, and suddenly there stood a dragon breathing fire. Jake was a bit nervous. Anyone would be. But he remembered what his mum had said, and he yawned at the dragon. And the dragon yawned back. And when he did, all the air rushed into his mouth and put out his fire. And a dragon without fire isn't a bit frightening. And the poor beast ran away yelping into the trees, and Jake went on his way. In the distance, he saw a marvellous castle with a long winding path up to a drawbridge, and he knew it was the home of the Yammy of Yorn. Jake was very pleased. But when he got to the castle gates, there was a guard with a sword, and he said, "Halt! Who goes there?" "Jake," said Jake. "Have you an appointment?" asked the guard in a fussy way. "You can't get in without an appointment." Jake remembered what his mum had said, and he yawned. And the guard yawned back. Once, then twice, and then he rubbed his eyes and slid all the way down his sentry box, fast asleep. And Jake walked past him into the castle. It was a lovely castle, and at the end of a very long, long room, on a high throne, he saw a very old, old man, and he knew it was the Yammy of Yorn. "Good evening," said Jake, who had nice manners, "and how do you do?" "Good evening, Jake," said the Yammy of Yorn, who knew it was Jake. "And why have you come to see me?" "I can't sleep," said Jake. "Can you tell me what to do about it, please?" And the Yammy of Yorn began to laugh. He laughed, and he laughed, and laughs are like yawns. When someone laughs, it makes other people laugh. And so Jake did, although he wasn't quite sure why. The Yammy laughed so much he had to hold onto his throne, and Jake laughed so much he had to hold his tummy and roll on the floor. Finally, the Yammy of Yorn stopped laughing and just chuckled a bit, and he said, "But you are asleep." And Jake stopped laughing too. "Am I?" he asked in surprise. "Well, you must be," said the Yammy of Yorn, "for no one comes to see me unless they are asleep. I am a dream, you see, one of the nicest dreams, of course." "And the most exciting," said Jake, remembering the lion and the dragon and the guard. "But how do I find my way back?" he asked. "Why, you just wake up," said the Yammy. "But first we'll have a feast." When Jake woke up, he was back in bed, and it was morning. "I met the Yammy of Yorn," he told his mum. "And now that you know the way," she said, "you can go as often as you like." And Jake did. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
Good evening. Hello. Oh, how nice. That's friendly, isn't it, in that section? Thanks. Right, I'm Helen Lederer, and I'm going to be doing a poem written by John Betchman, who wrote it some time ago, and it's about ponies. Now, I'm told that some people actually do ride ponies in Hertford. Is this true? Anyone? Any hands? Yes? Okay, I get asthma. But it was written some time ago, and there's lots of horsey words, which I didn't understand. So when I get to the horsey words, I'm going to make them extra loud so we can understand together. I've learnt a lot. Okay. And it's about a little girl called Diana who has a friend, or the other way round. You'll understand. Okay. And also, in those days, they spoke very differently, so it's quite posh. I'm told that some people are quite posh in Hertfordshire. Is this true? It's very posh. Very, very posh. Posher than even you. Ready? Are we ready? Thank you. It's awfully bad luck on Diana. Her ponies have swallowed their bits. She fished down their throats with a spanner and frightened them all into fits. So now she's attempting to borrow. Do lend her some bits, Mummy, do. I'll lend her my own for tomorrow, but today I'll be wanting them too. Oh, just look at Prunella on Guzzle. Oh, the wizardest pony on earth. Why doesn't she slacken his muzzle and tighten the breech in his girth? I say, Mummy, there's Mrs. Geezer. Doesn't she look pretty sick? I bet it's because Mona Lisa was hit on the bum with a brick. Miss Blewett says Monica threw it, but Monica says it was John. But John's very thick with Miss Blewett, so Monica's sulking alone. And Margaret failed in her paces. Her withers got tied in a noose, so her coronets caught in the traces, and now all her fetlocks are loose. Don't know what that means. Anyway, just stay with me. Oh, it's me now. It's me now. I'm terribly nervous. I wonder if Smudges will shy. She's practically certain to swerve as her pelham is over one eye. Don't know what a pelham is, but never mind. Oh, wasn't it naughty of Smudges? Oh, Mummy, I'm sick with disgust. She threw me in front of the judges, and my silly old collarbones burst. Thank you.
Good evening. How lucky am I to follow that? When I was asked to come here and read to kids, I thought that was right up my street because I'm essentially a big kid myself, so this is very straightforward for me. I'm going to read you a section from a book that it was my favorite book when I was a kid, and this section made me laugh when I was 5 years old, and then again when I was 15 years old, and again when I was 25 years old, and now I'm really old at 35. Still makes me laugh because I'm a big kid. It's Roald Dahl, the BFG. There's a little intake of breath there as everybody's very excited by this. Does anybody not know the BFG? Do I need to explain what it's about? No, so we're all good. So this is the point in the BFG where Sophie is in the cave and she's just found out that the BFG, the big friendly giant, doesn't eat people like all the rest of the horrible giants. And he eats snozzcumbers instead, the most disgusting vegetable, like basically most vegetables. But the thing that he does have, which is nice, he doesn't drink water, he drinks frobscottle. And this is the point in which Sophie finds out what it is. Here is frobscottle, he cried, holding the bottle up, proud and high, as though it contained some rare fine wine. Delumptious, fizzy frobscottle, he shouted. He gave it a shake, and the green stuff began to fizz like mad. But look, she said, it's fizzing the wrong way. And indeed it was. The bubbles, instead of traveling upwards and bursting on the surface, were shooting downwards and bursting on the bottom. A pale green frothy fizz was forming at the bottom of the bottle. What on earth is you meaning, the wrong way? Asked the BFG. Well, in our fizzy drink, Sophie said, the bubbles always go up and burst at the top. Upwards is the wrong way, the BFG said, in a very northern accent. You mustn't ever be having the bubbles going upwards. That is the most flush-bunking rubbish I've ever heard. Well, why do you say that? Sophie said. I will explain, said the BFG, but tell me first, what name is you calling your frobscottle by? Well, one is Coke, Sophie said, another is Pepsi. There are lots of them. Another bubbles is all going up. Well, yes. Catastrous, said the BFG. Upgoing bubbles is a catastrous disastrophe. Will you please tell me why? Sophie said. If you listen carefully, I will try to explain, said the BFG. When you was drinking this cokey drink of yours, it is going straight down into your tummy. Is that right? Or is it left? It's right, Sophie said. And the bubbles is also going into your tummy, right or left? Right again, Sophie said. Which means, said the BFG, that they will all come swish-whiffling up your throat and out of your mouth and make a foulsome, belchy burp. Well, that's often true, Sophie said, but what's wrong with a little burp now and again? Sort of fun. Burping is filthsome, said the BFG. Us giants is never doing it. But with your drink, Sophie said, what was it you called it? Frobscottle? Yes, with Frobscottle, the bubbles in your tummy will go downwards, and that could have a far nastier result. Why nasty? Said the BFG. Well, because, Sophie said, blushing a little bit, if they go down instead of up, they'll be coming out somewhere else with an even ruder noise and louder. A whiz popper! Cried the BFG, beaming at her. Us giants is making whiz poppers all the time. Whiz popping is a sign of happiness. It's music in our ears. You are surely not telling me that a little whiz popping is forbidden amongst human beings? Well, it's considered extremely rude, Sophie said. But you is whiz popping, is you not? Now and again? Asked the BFG. Everyone is whiz-popping, if that's what you call it, Sophie said. Kings and queens are whiz-popping. Presidents are whiz-popping. People at the Hertford Theatre are whiz-popping. Glamorous film stars are whiz-popping. Little babies are whiz-popping, but where I come from, it is not polite to talk about it. Redunculous, said the BFG. If everyone is making whiz-poppers, then why not talk about it? We is now going to have a swiggle of this delicious Frobscottle, and you will see the happy result. BFG shook the bottle vigorously. Pale green stuff fizzed and bubbled. He removed the cork and took a tremendous gurgling swig. Oh, it's glummy, he said. I love it. For a few moments, big friendly giant stood quite still, and a look of absolute ecstasy began to spread over his long, wrinkly face. Then suddenly, the heavens opened. He let fly with a series of the loudest and rudest noises Sophie had ever heard in her life. They reverberated around the walls of the cave like thunder, and the glass jars rattled. But most astonishing of all, the force of the explosions actually lifted the enormous giant off his feet like a rocket. Whoa! He cried when he came down to earth again. Now that is some whiz-popping for you. Sophie burst out laughing. She couldn't help it. Have some yourself, cried the BFG, tipping the neck of the enormous bottle towards her. Don't you have a cup? Sophie said, no, just a bottle. Sophie opened her mouth and very gently the BFG tipped the bottle forward and poured some of the fabulous Frobscottle down her throat. Oh, gosh, and how delicious it was. It was sweet and refreshing. It tasted of vanilla and cream with just the faintest trace of raspberries on the edge of the flavor, and the bubbles were wonderful. Sophie could actually just feel them bouncing and bursting like that all around her tummy. It was an amazing sensation. It felt as though hundreds of tiny people were dancing a jig inside her and tickling her with their toes. It was lovely. It's amazing, she cried. Just wait, said the BFG. Sophie could feel the bubbles traveling lower and lower down into her tummy, and then suddenly, inevitably, the explosion came. Well, the trumpet sounded, and she too made the walls of the cavern ring with the sound of music and embarrassing thunder. Bravo, shouted the BFG, waving the bottle. You was very good for a beginner. Let's have some more.
I don't know how I can beat popping, but I was lucky enough to be here last year, and I read one of my favourite books that my mum used to read me. But this year I wanted to find a new author, and I was lucky enough to go into the children's bookshop, and somebody said, just read this first chapter of this book, Rooftoppers by Catherine Rundell. and I read it, and then I read the whole book, and I held it to my heart afterwards because it's a beautiful story. Some of you may have read it, about pursuing your dreams and never ignoring a possible. So I'm just going to read you the first chapter. On the morning of its first birthday, a baby was found floating in a cello case in the middle of the English Channel. It was the only living thing for miles, just the baby and some dining room chairs and the tip of a ship disappearing into the ocean. There'd been music in the dining hall, and it was music so loud and so good that nobody had noticed the water flooding in over the carpet. The baby was found wrapped for warmth in the musical score of a Beethoven symphony. It had drifted almost a mile from the ship and was the last to be rescued. The man who lifted it into the rescue boat was a fellow passenger and a scholar. It's a scholar's job to notice things. He noticed that it was a girl with hair the colour of lightning and the smile of a shy person. Think of nighttime with a speaking voice, or think how moonlight might talk, or think of ink if ink had vocal cords. Give those things a narrow aristocratic face with hooked eyebrows and long arms and legs, and that is what the baby saw when she was lifted out of her cello case and up into safety. His name was Charles Maxim, and he determined, as he held her in his large hands at arm's length, as he would a leaky flower pot, that he would keep her. The baby was almost certainly a year old. They knew this because of the red rosette pinned to her front, which read 1. The girl held on to his earlobe with a grubby finger and thumb. "Happy birthday, my child," he said. Charles did not only give the baby a birthday, but he gave her a name. He chose Sophie on that first day, on the grounds that nobody could possibly object to it. "Your day has been dramatic and extraordinary, my child," he said. "It might be best to have the most ordinary name available." Then he fetched his coat and folded her up in it and took her home in a carriage. Charles had never really known a child before. He told Sophie as much on the way home. "I do, I'm afraid, understand books far more readily than I understand people. Books are so easy to get along with," he said. The carriage ride took 4 hours, and Charles held Sophie on the very edge of his knee and told her about himself, as though she were an acquaintance at a tea party. He was 36 years old and 6'3". He spoke English to people, French to cats, and Latin to the birds. He had once nearly killed himself trying to read and ride a horse at the same time. "But I will be more careful," he said, "now that there is you, little cello child." Charles's home was beautiful, but it was not safe. It was all staircases and slippery floorboards and sharp corners. He said, "I'll have to buy smaller chairs, and we'll have thick red carpets." Sophie loved the house at first sight. The bricks were painted the brightest white in London and shone even in the dark. The basement was used to store the overflow of books and paintings and several brands of spiders. And the roof, that belonged to the birds. Charles lived in the space in between. At home, after a hot bath in front of the stove, Sophie looked very white and fragile. Charles had not known a baby so terrifyingly tiny a thing before. She felt too small in his arms, and he was almost relieved when there was a knock at the door. He laid Sophie down carefully on a chair with a Shakespearean play as a booster seat and went upstairs 2 at a time. When he returned, he was accompanied by a large, grey-haired woman. Hamlet was slightly damp, and Sophie was looking embarrassed. Charles scooped down and picked her up, hesitating first over an umbrella stand in the corner, and then the top of the stove, inside the sink. He smiled, and his eyebrows and eyes smiled too. "Please don't worry," he said. "We all have accidents, Sophie." Then he bowed at the woman. "Let me introduce you, Sophie. This is Miss Elliot from the National Childcare Agency. Miss Elliot, this is Sophie from the ocean." The woman sighed, an official sort of sigh, and frowned, and pulled clean clothes from a parcel. Give it to me. Charles took the clothes from her. I took this child from the sea, ma'am. Sophie watched with the large eyes. She has nobody to keep her safe. Whether I like it or not, she is my responsibility. Well, not forever. I beg your pardon. The child is your ward. She is not your daughter. This was the sort of woman who spoke in italics. You'd be willing to lay bets that her hobby was organizing people. This is a temporary arrangement. I beg to differ, said Charles, but we can fight about this later. The child is cold. He handed the vest to Sophie, who supped on it. He took it back and put it on her. Then he hefted her in his arms, as though about to guess her weight at a fair, and looked at her closely. You see, she seems a very intelligent baby. Sophie's fingers, he saw, were long and thin and clever. And she has hair the colour of lightning. How could you possibly resist her? I'll have to come round to check on her, and I really don't have the time. A man can't do this kind of thing alone. Certainly, please do come, said Charles, and he added, as if he couldn't stop himself, and if you feel that you absolutely can't stay away, I will endeavour to be grateful. But this child is my responsibility. Do you understand? Oh, but it's a child, and you're a man. Your powers of observation are formidable, said Charles. You are a credit to your optician. But what are you going to do with her? Charles looked bewildered. I'm going to love her. Well, that should be enough, if the poetry I've read is anything to go by. Charles handed Sophie a red apple and took it back and rubbed it on his sleeve until he could see his face in it. He said, I'm sure the secrets of childcare, dark and mysterious though they are, no doubt, are not impenetrable. Charles sat the baby on his knee, handed her the apple, and began to read aloud to her from A Midsummer Night's Dream. It was not perhaps the perfect way to begin a new life, but it showed potential.
Boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, we're very excited to have Ruben Josephs here with us tonight. He is the founder of the very funny and incredibly popular book-loving website, Mango Bubbles Books.
Hello, I'm Ruben Josephs, and I'm from Mango Bubbles Books. I'm going to be reading Chapter 1 from You're a Bad Man, Mr. Gum by Andy Stanton. Chapter 1, The Garden of Mr. Gum. Mr. Gum was a fierce old man with a red beard and two bloodshot eyes that stared out at you like an octopus curled up in a bad cave. He was a complete horror who hated children, animals, fun, and corn on the cob. What he liked was snoozing in bed all day, being lonely, and scowling at things. He slept and scowled and picked his nose and ate it. Most of the townsfolk of Lamonic Bibber avoided him, and the children were terrified of him. Their mothers would say, "Go to bed when I tell you," or Mr. Gum would come and shout at your toys and leave slime on your books. That usually did the trick. Mr. Gum lived in a great big house in the middle of town. Actually, it wasn't that great because he'd turned it into a disgusting pigsty. The rooms were filled with junk and pizza boxes. Empty milk bottles lay around like wounded soldiers in a war against milk. There were old newspapers from years and years ago with headlines like, "Vikings invade Britain," and "World's first newspaper invented today." Insects lived in the kitchen cupboards, not just small insects, but great big ones with faces and names and jobs. Mr. Gum's bedroom was absolutely grimsters. The wardrobe contained so much mould and old cheese that there was hardly any room for his moth-eaten clothes. And the bed was never made. I don't mean that the duvet had never been put back on the bed. I mean the bed had never actually been made. Mr. Gum hadn't gone to the bother of assembling it. He just chucked all the bits of wood on the floor and dumped a mattress on top. There was broken glass in the windows, and the ancient carpet was the colour of unhappiness and smelt like a toilet. Anyway, I could be here all day going on about Mr. Gum's house, but I think you've got the idea. Mr. Gum was an absolute laser who couldn't be bothered with niceness and tidying and brushing his teeth, or anyone else's teeth for that matter. But, and as you can hear, it's a big but, he was always extremely careful to keep his garden tidy. In fact, Mr. Gum kept his garden so tidy that it was the prettiest, greeniest, floweriest and gardeniest garden in the whole of Lamonic Bibber. Here's how amazing it was. Think of a number between 1 and 10. Multiply that number by 5. Add on 350. Take away 11. Throw all those numbers away. Now think of an amazing garden. Whatever number you started with, you should now be thinking of an amazing garden. And that's how amazing Mr. Gum's garden was. In spring, it was bursting with crocuses and daffodils. In summer, there were roses, sunflowers, and those little blue ones, what they called again. You know those blue ones, they look a bit like dinosaurs. Anyway, there were tons of them. In autumn, the leaves from the big oak tree covered the lawn, turning it gold like a gigantic leafy robot. In winter, it was winter. No one in town could understand how Mr. Gum's garden could be so pretty, greeny, flowery and gardeny when his house was such a filthy tip. "Maybe he just likes gardening," said Jonathan Ripples, the fattest man in town. "Perhaps he's trying to win a garden contest," said a little girl called Peter. I reckon he just quite likes gardening," said Martin Launderette, who ran the laundrette. "Oi, that was my idea," said Jonathan Ripples. "No, it wasn't," said Martin Launderette. "You can't prove it, fatso." In fact, they were all wrong. The real reason was this. Mr. Gum had to keep the garden tidy, because otherwise an angry fairy would appear in his bathtub and start whacking him with the frying pan. You see, there is always a simple explanation for things. Mr. Gum hated the fairy, but he couldn't work out how to get rid of it. So his only choice was to do the gardening or its pan wax. And so life went on in the peaceful town of Lamonic Bibber. Everyone got on with their business, and Mr. Gum snoozed the days away in his dirty house and did lots of gardening he didn't want to do. And nothing much ever happened, and the sun went down over the mountains. The end. Sorry, I nearly forgot. Something did happen once. That's what this story's about. I do apologise. Right, what is it? Oh, of course! How could I be so stupid? It was that massive whopper of a dog. How on earth could I forget about him? Right then. One day, a massive whopper of a dog... Actually, I think we better have a new chapter. Sorry about all this, everyone.
Can we please invite them all to the stage? And I'd like you to give them all a huge Hertford Theatre welcome and a big thank you. Brilliant.